Do you ever feel like the scales of justice are perpetually tipped, especially when you look at the powerful, the arrogant, those who seem to get away with everything? We often watch in frustration, in silent outrage, as individuals wield immense power, inflict unimaginable suffering, and strut through life seemingly untouchable, their arrogance growing with every unchallenged injustice. It's a primal human longing, isn't it, to see accountability, to witness the universe rebalance itself when hubris reaches its peak. And there are moments in history, moments so profoundly unsettling, so viscerally graphic, that they etch themselves into the very fabric of our collective memory, serving as chilling reminders that some scales, indeed, do eventually find their balance. Imagine a scene, not from fiction, but from the annals of history itself. A king, resplendent in robes of silver, shimmering in the morning sun, stands before an adoring multitude. The air is thick with acclamation, with shouts declaring him divine, a god walking among men. And in that very instant, as the words of blasphemous praise reach their crescendo, something shifts. A sudden, searing agony rips through his very being, unseen but devastating. His face contorts, the silver robes seem to mock his sudden collapse. Within minutes, he is being carried away, a husk of his former glory, his body ravaged by an invisible enemy. And the chilling detail, confirmed by ancient texts, is that he was, in the words of one account, eaten by worms alive. This isn't a fable, nor a whispered legend from the distant past. This is the documented, brutal end of Herod Agrippa I, a man who reigned with cunning and cruelty, whose life was a tapestry woven with political intrigue, ruthless ambition, and a chilling disregard for human life, especially the lives of those nascent Christians he so vehemently persecuted. The historical records, from the biblical book of Acts to the detailed chronicles of the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, paint a stark, almost unbelievably gruesome picture of divine retribution. But here's the shocking truth historians discovered, the nuances that deepen the horror and the psychological impact of his death. It wasn't just a sudden illness, it was a slow, agonizing decay, a public spectacle of suffering that unfolded over 5 days, leaving an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it, and raising profound questions about the nature of power, pride, and ultimate justice. Before we plunge into the stomach-churning details of his final moments, we must first understand the man. Who was this Herod Agrippa I, this figure whose death struck such terror and awe into the hearts of his contemporaries? He wasn't the Herod who ordered the slaughter of the innocents, that was his grandfather, Herod the Great. But Herod Agrippa I inherited much of his grandfather's cunning, his ambition, and his ruthless streak. His life was a dizzying ascent through the treacherous corridors of Roman power and Judean politics, a journey fraught with near-death experiences, imprisonment, and staggering reversals of fortune that would make any modern-day politician envious of his sheer resilience. Born Agrippa, around 10 BC, he was the son of Aristobulus IV and Berenice, and thus a grandson of Herod the Great. This lineage, while prestigious, also placed him squarely in the crosshairs of the endlessly feuding Herodian dynasty, a family synonymous with ruthless ambition and paranoia. His early life was spent largely in Rome, a strategic move by his grandfather to ensure an education befitting a future leader, and perhaps, more subtly, to keep him close where he could be observed. It was in the imperial court that young Agrippa forged crucial connections that would later define his destiny. He befriended Gaius, who would become the Emperor Caligula, and Claudius, who would eventually succeed him. These were not mere acquaintances, they were deep, personal relationships, cultivated through shared studies and the decadent lifestyle of Roman nobility. Imagine the parties, the intellectual debates, the political gossip that permeated their days, shaping the worldview of a future king. He immersed himself in Roman culture, mastering Latin and Greek, adopting Roman customs, even as his Jewish heritage remained a complicated undercurrent in his identity. But Agrippa's life in Rome was far from smooth sailing. He lived lavishly, accumulated enormous debts, and at one point, found himself in such dire financial straits that he fled Rome to avoid his creditors. He even contemplated suicide. This is where the story takes a dark turn, revealing the depth of his desperation. He relied on the generosity of his sister, Herodias, infamous for her role in the death of John the Baptist, and her husband, Herod Antipas, the Tetrarch of Galilee. But their relationship was fraught with tension and resentment. Agrippa, despite his royal blood, was dependent on them, a humiliation he deeply resented. He was a man of immense pride, and to be beholden to those he considered beneath him, especially his own relatives, festered in his ambitious soul. His fortunes began to shift through a series of political maneuvers and outright gambles. After a period of exile and financial ruin, Agrippa returned to Rome, where he managed to re-establish his ties with the imperial family. He ingratiated himself with Emperor Tiberius, but his impulsive nature nearly cost him everything. He once openly expressed his desire for Caligula to inherit the throne, an indiscretion reported to Tiberius, leading to his imprisonment. For 6 months, Agrippa was chained, a prisoner of the very empire he sought to impress. This period in chains, a stark contrast to his earlier life of luxury, must have deeply scarred him, hardening his resolve and sharpening his political acumen. He learned patience, cunning, and the art of survival in the viper's nest of Roman politics. Then, Tiberius died, and Caligula, his friend, ascended to the throne. This was Agrippa's moment. Caligula, true to their friendship, not only released Agrippa but showered him with honors, effectively making him king over significant territories previously ruled by his uncles and cousins, including the tetrarchies of Philip and Lysanias. Suddenly, the penniless debtor was a king, albeit a client king of Rome. What history books don't tell you about this death is how intricately woven Agrippa's life was with the very fabric of Roman imperial power, making his downfall all the more shocking. His rise was a testament to his unique ability to navigate and exploit the capricious nature of Roman emperors, a skill honed through years of desperate struggle. Later, upon Caligula's assassination, Agrippa played a critical role in mediating the succession, ensuring Claudius ascended to the throne. In gratitude, Claudius expanded Agrippa's kingdom even further, granting him Judea and Samaria, territories that had previously been under direct Roman rule. By AD 41, Herod Agrippa I had effectively reunited all the territories that his grandfather, Herod the Great, had once ruled. He was the most powerful Jewish ruler since Herod the Great, and for a time, he managed to walk a tightrope between appeasing his Roman overlords and demonstrating his loyalty to his Jewish subjects. This is the part that changes everything about how we see this death. He wasn't a minor figure but a king of immense power and influence. Agrippa understood the importance of optics and public perception. He meticulously cultivated an image as a devout Jew, observing the Mosaic law, participating in temple rituals, and even rescinding a decree from Caligula that would have placed a statue of the emperor in the temple. This endeared him to many Jews, particularly the Pharisees, who appreciated his outward piety. He fortified Jerusalem, rebuilt walls, and even acted as a patron of Jewish literature and education. He was, by all accounts, a master of populist appeal, skilled at winning the hearts of the very people he would later oppress. He recognized the volatile religious and political landscape of Judea, constantly balancing the demands of Rome with the expectations of his Jewish subjects. But beneath this veneer of piety and statesmanship lay the familiar Herodian cruelty and a deep-seated paranoia, especially towards any perceived threats to his authority. This is where his path tragically intersected with the burgeoning Christian movement. The early church, rapidly expanding and proclaiming a crucified Messiah as king, represented a radical challenge to both Roman imperial authority and the traditional Jewish religious establishment. To Agrippa, these new followers of the Way were a sect, a deviation, and a potential source of unrest that could destabilize his carefully constructed kingdom. Their allegiance was to a different king, a spiritual one, which in the eyes of an earthly ruler like Agrippa, often translated into political disloyalty. The book of Acts records his escalating persecution. In Acts 12, we read that Herod the king laid violent hands upon some who belonged to the church. He killed James the brother of John with the sword. This was not merely an execution, it was a calculated act of terror, a brutal demonstration of power. James was one of Jesus's inner circle, a prominent leader, and his martyrdom sent shockwaves through the early Christian community. He was the first apostle to be martyred, a chilling precedent that signaled a new wave of persecution. You might be wondering how this really happened, this swift, decisive blow against the nascent church. It was a strategic move by Herod, designed to curry favor with certain Jewish factions who were deeply hostile to the followers of Christ. The passage in Acts explicitly states, when he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. This is where the story takes a dark turn, where political expediency morphs into direct confrontation with divine intervention. Peter, arguably the most prominent apostle after James, was next. Herod had him arrested and imprisoned, intending to execute him after the Passover festival, undoubtedly to make an even bigger public spectacle, to assert his authority even further. Imagine the fear, the despair within the early church. They had just lost James, and now their spiritual rock, Peter, was chained in a high-security prison, guarded by 16 soldiers, awaiting a similar fate. They knew Herod's ruthlessness. They had seen it firsthand. Their only recourse was fervent prayer. And then, as Peter lay bound between two soldiers, an angel of the Lord appeared, a light shone in the cell, and Peter's chains miraculously fell off. He walked out of the prison, past bewildered guards, through the iron gate that opened by itself, and into the freedom of the city night. This dramatic, almost cinematic escape was not just a testament to divine power, it was a direct challenge to Herod's authority, a clear message that his power, no matter how absolute it seemed, had limits when it came to God's chosen. When Herod realized Peter had escaped, he flew into a rage, ordering an intensive search and executing the guards who had been on duty. This act of indiscriminate cruelty solidified his image as a tyrant driven by unbridled power and fear. The loss of Peter was not just a failure to execute, it was a profound public humiliation for the king, a direct affront to his perceived omnipotence. This incident, the execution of James and the miraculous escape of Peter, built an unprecedented level of psychological tension around Herod Agrippa. His reign, though seemingly stable, was now seen by some as actively opposing divine will. His hubris, fueled by political success and adulation, was reaching a dangerous peak. He believed himself untouchable, his power limitless. But here's the shocking truth historians discovered: even as he was persecuting the church, consolidating his power, and basking in popular acclaim, the stage was being set for his own catastrophic downfall, a demise so horrific it would be remembered for millennia as a clear instance of divine judgment. The setting for this climactic event was Caesarea Maritima, a magnificent port city on the Mediterranean coast, built by his grandfather, Herod the Great. It was a city that symbolized Roman power and Hellenistic culture, a stark contrast to the more traditional Jewish cities like Jerusalem. Herod Agrippa I had chosen Caesarea to host a grand festival, games, and a public assembly, celebrating the Emperor Claudius. It was also an opportunity for him to settle a trade dispute with the delegations from Tyre and Sidon, vital commercial partners who depended on Agrippa's kingdom for their food supply. They had angered him, and now they came seeking peace, prepared to flatter and appease the powerful king. This was a meticulously planned spectacle, designed to showcase Herod's authority, his wealth, and his favored status with Rome. He orchestrated this entire event to project an image of unparalleled power and benevolence. On the second day of the festival, Agrippa made his grand appearance. Flavius Josephus, in his Antiquities of the Jews provides a vivid description. He recounts how Agrippa, on a day dedicated to the emperor, came into the theater dressed in a cloak entirely made of silver. As the morning sun's rays struck his garment, it shimmered with such brilliance that it reflected the light, casting an almost ethereal glow, making him appear otherworldly. The sheer visual impact would have been breathtaking, designed to inspire awe and submission. You can almost feel the collective gasp of the crowd, the hushed reverence, as he ascended to his judgment seat, a throne elevated for all to see. He began to address the delegations from Tyre and Sidon. His speech was eloquent, charismatic, and undoubtedly full of the kind of pomp and self-importance that had become his trademark. He was at the zenith of his power, basking in the adoration of a vast crowd. And as he spoke, the adulation reached a fever pitch. The crowd, perhaps orchestrated by flatterers or genuinely overwhelmed by his presence, began to shout, "The voice of a god, and not of a man." This was not just enthusiastic applause, it was blasphemy, a direct attribution of divinity to a mortal man. And the shocking truth is, Herod Agrippa did not rebuke them. He reveled in it. He accepted the praise, absorbing it, allowing himself to be inflated by the intoxicating delusion of divine status. This moment, caught between human arrogance and divine patience, was the precise tipping point. According to Acts 12 verse 23, immediately an angel of the Lord struck him down, because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and died. Josephus's account, while not mentioning worms explicitly, offers a complementary, and equally horrifying, narrative. Josephus states that Agrippa did not refuse nor did he reject this flattery. And then, immediately a severe pain arose in his belly, and began in a most violent manner. This pain was instant, excruciating, and debilitating. He felt it even as the crowd's shouts of God echoed around the amphitheater. The king, who moments before had been a radiant, godlike figure, was suddenly bent over, writhing in agony, his face contorted in a grimace of unbearable suffering. Let me tell you what witnesses actually saw, according to Josephus. Herod Agrippa, overwhelmed by this sudden, incapacitating pain, turned to his friends and said, I, whom you call a god, am commanded presently to depart this life, while Providence thus reproves the lying words you just now uttered, and I, who was by you called immortal, am now going to die. This is a profoundly poignant detail, a moment of stark, terrifying clarity for the king, acknowledging his impending death and the justice behind it, even amidst his suffering. He was then carried out of the theatre, the shouts of adulation replaced by whispers of shock and fear. The silver robes, moments earlier a symbol of divine splendor, now seemed a cruel mockery of his utter helplessness. The sight of the once mighty king, struck down in an instant, must have been a pattern interrupt of unimaginable force for everyone present. Now, you might be wondering how this really happened, this rapid transformation from a celebrated monarch to a dying man, especially the chilling detail of being eaten by worms. The biblical account in Acts is succinct, eaten by worms and died. Josephus describes violent pains in his bowels and that he died after he had been tormented 5 days by the pain in his belly. While Josephus doesn't explicitly mention worms, the medical understanding of his time, combined with the biblical description, allows for several horrifying possibilities that converge on a common theme of internal decay and infestation. Medical historians and scholars have long debated the precise nature of Herod's ailment. Was it peritonitis, an inflammation of the abdominal lining, perhaps caused by a burst appendix or a perforated ulcer? This would explain the sudden, excruciating abdominal pain. Or perhaps a severe parasitic infection, like tapeworms or roundworms, which could lead to excruciating internal distress, blockages, and if the body decayed rapidly or was already deteriorating, secondary infestation. The term worms in ancient texts wasn't always a precise medical diagnosis, it could be a general term for any kind of internal decay or infestation that manifested externally, or simply a metaphorical description of a body being consumed from within. Consider the gruesome reality: if internal organs were failing, if there was gangrene or necrosis, the human body, especially in a hot climate, decays rapidly. Larvae of various insects, attracted to decaying flesh or present as parasites within the body, could indeed become visible or be expelled through orifices as the body's systems shut down. It's a truly unsettling thought, the idea of an individual, still alive, experiencing their body being consumed from the inside out, or infested in such a way that it becomes outwardly apparent. This is the part that changes everything about how we see this death. It wasn't just a sudden, clean end, but a slow, public, humiliating deterioration. The fact that it lasted for 5 days is crucial. This wasn't an instant death, but an extended, agonizing ordeal. Imagine the psychological torture for Herod Agrippa, lying on his deathbed, suffering unbearable pain, fully aware that his body was failing, perhaps even experiencing the visible manifestations of decay or infestation. He had lived a life of luxury and power, commanding legions and manipulating empires. Now, he was utterly helpless, subject to the most base and horrifying bodily betrayal. For those around him, his courtiers, his family, the populace, it would have been a profoundly disturbing spectacle. The swift judgment at the theatre, followed by this protracted, humiliating suffering, must have cemented in their minds the notion of divine retribution. The image of the king, who accepted divine accolades, being devoured from within, served as a stark, unforgettable lesson in humility. What history books don't tell you explicitly is the palpable sense of vindication felt by the early Christian community after Agrippa's death. This king, who had just executed James and imprisoned Peter, had now met a truly horrific end, a public display of divine judgment that must have strengthened their faith immensely. For them, it was clear proof that God protected his church, and that those who persecuted it would ultimately face divine justice. This death changed history in ways you never imagined, not just for the Herodian dynasty, but for the fledgling Christian movement, offering them a potent narrative of divine intervention and a powerful sense of hope in the face of ongoing persecution. The legacy of Herod Agrippa I's death extends far beyond the gruesome details. It serves as a profound moral and theological lesson, echoing through centuries of interpretation. In the context of the biblical narrative, his death is presented as a direct consequence of his hubris, his acceptance of divine glory. It's a stark reminder that all earthly power is transient, and ultimate authority belongs to God alone. The story emphasizes that blasphemy and persecution, especially against God's people, carry severe consequences. It reinforces the concept of divine judgment not merely as an abstract principle, but as a tangible, immediate, and utterly devastating reality. For the early Christians, it was a moment of profound validation. Their leader, James, had been martyred. Their spiritual rock, Peter, had been miraculously rescued from Agrippa's clutches. And now, the persecutor himself had been struck down in a public, unmistakable act of God. This narrative became a powerful testament to the sovereignty of God over human rulers, a source of courage and inspiration for a community facing immense external pressure. It instilled a deep sense of trust that even in their darkest hours, God was at work, protecting his own and bringing justice to bear. This sense of shared understanding and collective awe would have released powerful oxytocin, binding the community closer through their shared experience of witnessing God's hand. Moreover, Herod Agrippa's death had significant historical implications for the region. His vast kingdom, which had briefly reunited territories under a single Jewish ruler, was once again fragmented. After his death, his young son, Herod Agrippa II, was deemed too young to inherit such extensive responsibilities, and Judea reverted to direct Roman procuratorial rule. This marked a turning point, contributing to the increasing instability and resentment among the Jewish population, which would eventually culminate in the Jewish-Roman Wars and the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. His death was not just an individual tragedy, it was a pivot point in the tumultuous history of Judea, intensifying the volatile relationship between Rome and its Jewish subjects. The account of Herod Agrippa's death forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about power, responsibility, and the consequences of moral choices. It paints a vivid picture of a man consumed by pride, who sought to elevate himself to divine status, only to be brought low by a force far greater than any earthly kingdom. His life serves as a cautionary tale. The intoxicating allure of power can blind individuals to their own mortality and fallibility. The tragic irony is that Herod, who sought to establish a lasting legacy of glory and power, is primarily remembered for the horrifying manner of his death and the profound theological implications it carries. What can we take from this chilling narrative into our own lives? It's easy to look at the powerful figures of history and feel detached, but the human condition remains remarkably constant. The desire for recognition, the temptation of unchecked power, the seductive whispers of pride, these are struggles that transcend millennia. Herod's death reminds us that ultimate justice does exist, even when it feels elusive. It may not always manifest in such dramatic, visible ways, but the principle holds: actions have consequences, and arrogance, especially when it leads to oppression and cruelty, invites a reckoning. When you hear what really happened in those final moments, it triggers a deep-seated satisfaction for justice, a neurochemical release that confirms a universal moral order. This story also speaks to our shared mortality. No matter how powerful, how wealthy, how influential, every human being is ultimately subject to the same biological realities. Herod Agrippa, despite his silver robes and adoring crowds, could not escape the fragile limits of his own body. This shared vulnerability, this common destiny, fosters a sense of connection, reminding us that beneath the titles and trappings, we are all ultimately human. The cortisol-inducing fear of such a gruesome death eventually gives way to the meaning-making resolution: there is a higher purpose, a divine hand, that oversees all human affairs, ensuring that even the most powerful are held accountable. In the quiet contemplation of Herod Agrippa's end, we are invited to reflect on the nature of true power. Is it found in the fleeting adulation of crowds, in grand robes, or in the ability to oppress? Or is it found in humility, in justice, in a recognition of something greater than oneself? The mirror neurons in our brains, which allow us to empathize and learn from others, encourage us to internalize these lessons. While Herd is not a martyr, his story serves as an inverse example, a warning against the very hubris that martyrs defy. It inspires a different kind of courage, the courage to resist the allure of unbridled power, the courage to stand for justice even when it is unpopular, and the courage to acknowledge that our lives, and indeed all of history, unfold under the watchful eye of a sovereign God. Let us carry this reflection into a deeper understanding of life, justice, and eternity. Consider the profound mystery of our existence, the delicate balance between the physical and the spiritual. We are reminded that every life, no matter how grand or humble, is held in the palm of something beyond our comprehension. The story of Herd Agrippa I, devoured from within, challenges us to look beyond the superficial triumphs of this world and to seek a deeper, more enduring truth. It compels us to wrestle with the concept of accountability, not just in this life, but in the vast expanse of eternity. In the face of such raw, visceral justice, we are invited to find solace in the assurance that ultimately, every knee will bow and every tongue confess. The transient nature of earthly power, so vividly displayed in Herd's demise, underscores the eternal nature of divine authority. May this knowledge bring a profound sense of peace amidst the chaos of our world, reminding us that there is an ultimate reckoning, a final balance, where all injustices will be set right, and all pride will be humbled. May we find strength in this timeless truth, and may our hearts be guided by humility, justice, and a reverence for the one who holds all power in his hands. The final days of Herd Agrippa I stand as an enduring testament to the consequences of unchecked arrogance and the mysterious workings of divine justice. But what about another figure, a man of power and influence, whose end was equally tragic, though perhaps less overtly gruesome? Next time, we'll delve into the captivating, yet ultimately self-destructive, story of Judas Iscariot, a man driven by greed and betrayal, whose life ended in a manner equally as mysterious and perhaps even more psychologically disturbing. Was it a suicide, or something far more sinister that led to his body bursting open in a field? Join us as we unravel the chilling truth behind the death of the betrayer.